Monsieur Vasseur has had a lot to say about Lewis Hamilton's move. Let's take a look into that. Welcome to Quick Stop F1. My name is Nyasha and you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. We appreciate that. And before we get into all of the good stuff that Monsieur Vasseur has had to say about Lewis Hamilton and the move to Ferrari, which by all intents and purposes is not going as well as all of us would have hoped. Maybe it's going as well as some of you would have expected. However, let's see what he's had to say. But before we do that, of course, I've got to ask you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're here all season giving you that good F1 shit. Huh? Don't piss me off, bruh. MTN and F1 magazine. Ah! Okay, enough of that. Let's get on to what Fred Vasseur's had to say. And basically, he's given a pretty long interview. I think the race have covered it. I don't know if this was taken from elsewhere, but he's given a really detailed interview with the race. So I'm going to go through some of the key quotes in this. But before we do that, let's set the scene, right? Lewis Hamilton announces he's moving to Ferrari in February last year in what was quite possibly the biggest bombshell. That's what it felt like in February last year when Lewis Hamilton announced and Ferrari announced that he was moving from Mercedes to Ferrari. We then had this year-long divorce between Lewis and Mercedes, which brought about all of these thoughts of sabotage and behind the scenes kind of Machiavellian maneuverings from Toto Wolff. We also then obviously had details coming out about who Toto Wolff would want to replace Lewis Hamilton with. Obviously, we find out it's Kimi Antonelli, then the Max Verstappen saga. That's still going on. However, in the background, we're looking at Ferrari, which is ostensibly becoming the second best car on the grid. They're picking up race wins. They're picking up podiums. The excitement for Lewis Hamilton to go from a team which is ostensibly struggling to a team that is constantly on the podium and challenging for wins potentially towards the end of last season is something that has the F1 world salivating. Do we see Lewis Hamilton back at the front of the grid? Unfortunately, that's not what has happened at all. We've had no podiums. Obviously, there's a sprint victory in China as the high point. The best qualifying we've had is 4th in Monaco and 4th in Austria. No podiums as mentioned. So it's not gone terribly bad. And when you look at, especially recently, if you look at a difference in qualifying, we're talking about less than we're talking about a 10th and a half, a 10th of a second, kind of separating Charles and Lewis. But the grid is so converged at the moment that is the difference between making Q3 and not making Q3. That's the difference between 1st and 6th. It really is quite congealed in there. And when you think about it, when you start to look at narrative and you start to look at results, which this is a results-based business, unfortunately the results, no matter how we spin it, have just not been good enough for Lewis Hamilton compared to what the hype was before. So Fred essentially says that it's not been one issue, and I think this is a really important thing. It's not been one issue that's been holding Lewis back. It's the accumulation of small details: braking feel, ride height, balance. Now, if you think about the Belgium spin in sprint qualifying, Lewis talked about the brake feel and a new component. Essentially, they had new brakes that caused the spin. Ride height, obviously, we've had a plank elimination in China in the main race, whereas in the sprint race it was fine. So obviously them having to adjust for that. And some people blame that for Charles Leclerc's drop in performance in Hungary. I want to say, was it Hungary that he fell like a stone, or was it Belgium? God, I should really be able to remember that. I think it was Hungary. So these are the things that I think Charles is struggling with as well. But obviously, when you're coming into a new team, these are the things where if you're not used to it, it's something that can affect you. And Fred has actually come out and been quite outright. He said he admitted both he and Hamilton thought the switch would be easier than it's been. After almost 20 years at Mercedes and McLaren, Lewis is adapting to a whole new environment. And Vasseur has actually come out and said it was stupid to think that it would all click right away. I mean, look. Lewis thinks he can do everything, right? And he probably has, the evidence to do that. Lewis thought that he would make it into F1 when no one thought he'd make it into F1. Lewis thought that he'd beat Fernando Alonso when no one thought he'd beat Fernando Alonso. Lewis thought that he would win a world championship when no one thought he'd win a world championship. Lewis, at one point, probably believed that he was on track to beat Michael Schumacher's pole record and win record when no one thought he could do that. And he did do that. He has broken every single barrier in this sport that you can imagine. Outside of the sport, no one said he could design clothes. He's got his own fashion capsules with Tommy Hilfiger, Dior. No one thought he'd be an investor. He's an investor in all kinds of things. He owns part of an NFL franchise. All of this to say, when Lewis Hamilton sets his mind to something, normally it gets done. And there was probably an underestimation of just how grand a change in environment, culture, mechanic feel of this car, of this team that there would be. And clearly that's affected him on and off the track. He came out and said that, once we get to the summer break, he's probably going to have a little cry. It's been the heaviest season he's had so far. And that's simply because he's been trying to get to grips with the culture of the team, as well as, trying to learn all of these new things about the car. And look, it's not been all incredibly bad, right? I think we saw once we got to Canada, right? Canada was a P5 finish. Spain, consistent top 6 pace. Austria, obviously the P4 start. It looks like it was getting more comfortable, but obviously then we get to Hungary and we get to, this situation when Lewis Hamilton starts, I think, he essentially starts being quite critical of himself. He called himself absolutely useless. And this was the race where Hamilton said that Ferrari should replace him. Again, Fred Vasseur, very supportive of this and saying, look, it's just he's got high standards. And this is the frustration talking. So all of this to say, clearly, Lewis Hamilton is a man who is backed by his manager. And Lewis Hamilton is a man whose team are very much behind him. And if you listen to some of the rumblings about Lewis's contract, it's very much I will leave when I want to, and that could be up to 2027. So, there's no real thought of Lewis leaving. So what does that mean going forward? Well, basically, Vasseur's come out and said once the small issues are ironed out, Hamilton will be back at the sharp end. Although Lewis, feels like it might take months. Lewis is saying he's enjoying the challenge. We've seen him posting on social media recently, talking about his dog and saying out of office is on. And, hopefully this break will allow Lewis the space and the energy to kind of move forward and hit the road running once they get back in Zandvoort, which is in just over 2 weeks' time. So what do you guys think? For me personally, look, I think we all know what this channel's stance is on Lewis Hamilton, and I think form is temporary, class is permanent. I think Lewis is a class driver. And I do think the regulations next year will help. I do think that a year embedded into the team will help. I don't think we're seeing the gap in qualifying that I think the gap in qualifying is being exacerbated by how close the rest of the grid is. With how strong Ferrari's car will be next year with the new engine regulations, you would think that he will be closer to the front. And we all know that the race pace is what has been really strong with Lewis, especially since around Canada. So for me, I don't really have any problems. I think we all knew this season was going to be difficult, but what it's about is next season. It was always about next season. But the problem is with someone like Lewis Hamilton, you just cannot have the time to embed. Results are wanted straight away. Critics are at their harshest. Supporters are at their most expectant. And when you have that, it's impossible to kind of to have that grace to warm up, to get to where they need to, the same grace that is maybe afforded to other drivers on the grid. So let's see how it goes. But let me know what you guys think. I would love to know what you think in the comments below. And guys, please, if you disagree, just disagree in a respectful manner. I've got no issue with people disagreeing. I love chatting, I love content, but what we're not going to do is be rude to each other in the comments. So please let me know what you think. Much love to you guys. If you like this video, please like the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for some more F1 content as we gear up towards the return in Zandvoort. But until then, remember, no matter what life throws at you, keep it on the black stuff. Until next time, take care.